So I got the opportunity to go see Dune Part 2 over the weekend, and I initially wanted to do a review of Part 1, didn't get around to it, but I decided that since I have gotten the full story of the first book, Dune Part 1 and Part 2, I've seen them both at this point, I decided to do a review of both movies and of the story. So if you haven't seen the first part or the second part, or you're waiting to see the second part, there will be a handful of spoilers in this video. So if you don't want to hear any spoilers about Dune Part 1 or Part 2, then you're just going to have to skip. But overall, I think it was a really good movie. There was a lot of hype because of the first one, how great the first one was. There was a lot of hype going into the second one. Can they really follow through and make a sequel? I know it's part of the same story. It's Part 1 and Part 2 of the same story, but there is a lot of pressure to produce a sequel that lives up to the hype and lives up to the quality of the initial movie. And I think for the most part, they did follow through with that. Just to give some context and a recap on the story, the Dune movies, Dune Part 1 and Part 2, are based upon the novel written by Frank Herbert in the 1960s. And the story is kind of a more grounded version of Star Wars. It's a more political, it's kind of like a political conspiracy. And in Star Wars, the main focus of the story is that of Anakin Skywalker and his family, and also of the Jedi and the Sith, the Jedi Order, and the prophetic, spiritual, religious side of things. That's more in the forefront. And all of the political things that go on in Star Wars are kind of in the background. I mean, you kind of get a taste of it in Star Wars: The Clone Wars, and then also in the prequel trilogy, where you see Palpatine's rise to power. But for the most part, it is the prophecy of the Chosen One. It's Anakin Skywalker. It's the Jedi. It's the Sith. That is the main focus. In Dune, at least in the first part, the prophetic, religious side of things is more in the background, and the political things are more in the forefront. Now, as you get to the end of Part 2, the prophecy becomes more and more a part of the story. Like, that carries more significance and carries more of the plot towards the end of Part 2. But at least in the first part, it's kind of secondary to the political things that are going on. Now, just to set the stage a little bit of the universe that Dune is set in, it's similar to Star Wars and also Game of Thrones, where you have an emperor who is in charge and in control of the entire known galaxy. But like Game of Thrones, you also have various different royal families spread throughout the land, spread throughout the galaxy. You have dukes and barons and royal families that have been in control of planets, resources. And these royal families, these houses in the galaxy, carry a great amount of support. They carry a great amount of burden. And the story really centers around these houses and also the planet of Arrakis. The economy is boosted, the economy of the galaxy is boosted by a resource known as spice, which can only be found on the planet of Dune, on the planet of Arrakis. And so this really sets the table for a conflict, because whoever controls the spice controls the money, controls the economy, and in a lot of ways controls the galaxy. The planet of Arrakis initially was in control, in possession of House Harkonnen, who were in control of spice production and therefore very, very wealthy. And Paul Atreides, who is the main character in the story, his father, Duke Leto Atreides, was in charge of another planet. They obviously used spice, and spice was valuable, but they were not in control of the production of it. Now, the emperor was afraid, because of how great a man Duke Leto Atreides was and how powerful his house had become. He was afraid that Duke Leto would rise up and overtake the throne from him. And so, because he was afraid of the House Atreides, the voice that House Atreides had within the galaxy, he removed House Harkonnen from production of spice from Arrakis and placed House Atreides in charge. Now, this set the grounds for a war between House Harkonnen and House Atreides, because whoever controls the spice controls the power, has the power. And in order to regain the resource, House Harkonnen, with the secret help of the Emperor, attacks House Atreides and takes back control of Arrakis. Now, they eliminate Duke Leto, and they wanted to eliminate all significance and signs of his house and his influence, so naturally they try to also take out his son, Paul, who is the main character. But Paul Atreides and his mother escape to live with the native people of Arrakis known as the Fremen. And that's really the plot of the first movie, is that you have House Atreides come in, they take control of Arrakis, things do not go well, they go to war with House Harkonnen attacks them, they are almost completely destroyed, and then Paul Atreides and his mother are sent to live in exile, essentially. The second part of the movie, and most of the second movie, is really about Paul Atreides living with the Fremen and adopting their culture and adopting their ways, because there is a prophecy that says that there would be an outsider, which would be Paul, that would come to the Fremen and offer them a way to restore the planet of Arrakis to the oasis that it once was. And so within the world of Dune, you have two corresponding prophecies. One of the Fremen, of the outsider coming in to restore balance to the planet, but also a conspiracy on behalf of the Bene Gesserit, which are kind of the religious figures of the galaxy. They're like the Jedi, right? They have power, they have influence, and they have like Jedi mind tricks where they can tell people to do something and then they'll do it depending on how powerful they are, or if you're weak-minded or something like that. And they have this idea that there is kind of a hive mind where eventually a Messiah will be produced, and that person will have access to all past knowledge. And because they have access to all past knowledge, they can appropriately lead the galaxy forward to a better place. And initially they believed that this could only be a woman, like it's a religious group of women who have a lot of control and influence in the galaxy. But Paul obviously breaks those barriers, being a man, and ends up kind of becoming both the savior of the galaxy, kind of, and then also the liberator of the Fremen. Now, the story does go on. The story doesn't end with Paul becoming the leader of the Fremen and then also the Emperor, because at the end of the second movie, again, spoilers, at the end of the second movie, he becomes the leader of the Fremen, he seemingly fulfills the prophecy of the Fremen, and he challenges the Emperor to a duel, essentially. Now, the Emperor is like an 80-year-old man who can't fight for himself, but he has a champion, which it is Baron Harkonnen's nephew, who is a great warrior, fights on behalf of the Emperor, and Paul Atreides defeats him one-on-one in combat and essentially takes over the throne. And because he defeated the champion and defeated the armies of the Emperor shows a subservient attitude towards Paul. And Paul takes the hand of his daughter to be his wife. And the second movie ends with Paul taking the throne and then letting the rest of the great houses within the galaxy know that he has defeated the champion. He is now technically the emperor and the ruler. Do they accept and want to be subservient to him? The houses say no. And the second movie ends with him going to war with the great houses. It kind of ends on a cliffhanger. And from what I understand about the future books, there are sequels. It doesn't necessarily end well for everyone, even though that the prophecy is seemingly fulfilled in a number of different ways. I mean, we'll have to see. I haven't read the books, and I believe there's going to be at least one more movie. But the reason why this movie succeeds, and it's not that I don't think Star Wars succeeds, it's just an easy comparison to make. It is a more grounded, more serious version of Star Wars, and that is kind of hard to do, especially when you have, it's a created universe. This isn't based on real life events. We're not talking about real life people. And sometimes if you have that kind of situation and the people try and come across serious in a fabricated universe, it doesn't always work. But in this universe, it really, really works. And everybody comes to the table to bring that seriousness to the movie. And the script is very serious. There's no Jar Jar Binks in Dune, okay? Like there's no Jar Jar Binks. There's no really comical outlet in these movies. Everybody who is royalty acts like royalty. Everybody who is a warrior acts like a warrior. They take it all very seriously. And it works. It really works because of that. And one thing that it does do better than Star Wars, I'm a huge fan of Anakin Skywalker. I love Anakin Skywalker's character. Even with Hayden Christensen, who got a lot of hate initially for his portrayal of the character, I like Hayden Christensen's portrayal. I love the portrayal of Anakin in the Clone Wars, and I think he has a pretty solid story if you watch all of that canonically. But one problem with Anakin is that he wants too many things. He wants everything. He wants to have everything all at once, all the time. And he is emotionally all over the place. And ultimately, that leads to his own destruction. Now, he does ultimately fulfill the prophecy by bringing balance to the Force and killing the Emperor. And some of that is kind of undermined in the sequel trilogy. But he's just an emotional wreck. He wants everything. He wants to rule the galaxy and have the power and be the best Jedi and be the most powerful Sith and have Padme and be a good person. He just wants everything. And it is this lack of focus that leads to his downfall in a number of ways. With Paul Atreides, you can see that he is kind of conflicted because of the hive mind idea where because you have knowledge of the past, you can also kind of see the future. Paul Atreides can kind of see the future. So he knows that if he does this thing, if he goes with the Fremen, then there's a good chance that all of these things will take place. He will become the ruler of the galaxy and a bunch of horrible things will happen. But he still chooses to do that thing, even though he sees that this path is going to be difficult and that path is going to be difficult. He has to make a choice and he has to deal with the consequences of those choices. In the movie, he develops a romantic relationship with one of the Fremen, Chani, who is played by Zendaya. And throughout the entire second movie until the end, he is in love with her. They develop a relationship and he wants to be with her. He wants to be with the woman that he loves. But you get to the end of the movie and he defeats the Emperor's champion. He becomes the Emperor himself, essentially. He becomes the Duke of Arrakis and the ruler. So he has to take the hand of the princess. He has to take the hand of the Emperor's daughter. Obviously, this means that Chani is kind of out of the picture. Now, if it was Anakin Skywalker, he would be like, well, I get to have Chani and I get to be the ruler and everything's going to be okay. I'm going to make everything work. That's not the way it really is. That's not a realistic way of approaching things. Paul knows that he's going to have to sacrifice something. He's going to have to sacrifice his own feelings. He's going to have to sacrifice his emotions. He's going to have to sacrifice what he really wants, which is Chani. He really wants Chani. He's really in love with her, but he's going to have to sacrifice that in order to fill the role that he is supposed to fill as the chosen one, as a leader, as the emperor. And I think when you have people that are put in a situation and they handle it appropriately and realistically, it just makes for a better movie. Paul Atreides is not an emotional wreck. You can see that he is kind of driven. He is fearful because he can see the future to a certain extent. He is afraid of the things that might happen or he might do. He's also somewhat driven by revenge because the Baron Harkonnen killed his father, and the Harkonnens destroyed his house. They destroyed the people that he knew. They killed the people that he knew, and they actively sought out his destruction. So he has fear, he has anger, he wants revenge, but those things, he kind of accomplishes some of those things, like he does get revenge, but he's still fearful. But he still reacts realistically though. He doesn't think to himself, everything's going to go perfect, I'm going to get my revenge, and I'll have Chani, and I'll have everything I ever want. No, he has to sacrifice some things. He has to sacrifice his relationship with Chani in order to fully be who he is supposed to be. And I think that works in contrast to a character like Anakin Skywalker. And again, just a star-studded cast, a really good cast. I really missed Oscar Isaac as Duke. Atreides. I felt like his character was really good. His portrayal was really good. I mean, they can't just bring him back, even though his character died in the first movie. But it was just a really strong presence. I think Timothy Chalamet is really good. Zendaya is really good. I love Rebecca Ferguson. Rebecca Ferguson is a really good actor or actress. She is very good in this movie as well. And just stars all over the place. Stars all over the place. The graphics in the movie, and this is one of the reasons why it took so long to be properly adapted. There have been attempts to adapt the story before. I believe there was like a miniseries or a movie in the 1980s, which kind of fell flat and didn't gain a lot of traction. You really need the modern day technology with the computer generated images to bring this world to life. And it works. It really works. And even though this movie leans into CGI a fair amount, it doesn't take you out of the movie. Everything is molded well together. Everything looks great. It looks real. It looks believable. And it just comes together to make a really great sci-fi epic story. And I believe the director, I believe he is coming back to make a sequel. There were a handful of sequels written by Frank Herbert's son as well. So I don't know how far they will take it. But my brother, he likes reading a lot more than I do, so he was kind of explaining some things to me. And there's one more book that focuses on Paul Atreides and his story and his family. And the movie did kind of end on a cliffhanger, and he said that the book kind of ends the same way. So we'll see what happens. But overall, I just think it's really, really good. It is one of the better adaptions in terms of book to movie. And they needed every bit of the 5+ hours of screen time that you get to fill in all the gaps and produce all the content. And I was okay with it. And initially, before the 2.5 hour, 3 hour movie became more popular and more acceptable, I was kind of like, eh. Like, I remember watching Titanic for the first time. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like a 3-hour movie. I'm going to die. I'm not going to be able to make it through this. But if the story is good and the story captivates you in a unique way, then it doesn't really matter. I was sitting there, we had like an hour left in the movie, and I'm like, is there supposed to be a part 3? I leaned over to my brother and I was like, is there supposed to be a part 3 in this? Because they need to wrap it up. Like, it just seemed like there was so much more they had to get to, which they eventually did get to. But it did not feel like I was in the theater for 2 hours and 45 minutes, which I think was roughly the runtime of the second part. So definitely a good watch. Definitely go see it in theaters. The noise of the movie, the sound of the movie, the score of the movie are all great and are worth making a trip to the theater for. So overall, I give it's really good. Really, really good. And I would say it's probably going to be one of the better movies of the year and one of the great sci-fi movies in series of all time.